Hello again. Today we're going to be doing essays, particularly essays for Discovery, Module A and Module B, followed by some study tips. Alright, let's get into it. So for both Discovery and Module essays, we're going to follow a basic outline, and that is discussing firstly the thesis focus that you should be following, secondly an essay plan that you might like to follow, and then what your analysis should be focused on. This is all, of course, based on the rubric for each respective module. So for Discovery, I would suggest having a thesis focus that argues the worth of discovering as a whole. So this might look like, if the question was uncovering what is hidden and reconsidering what is known, the process of discovery allows us to uncover what is hidden and reconsider what is known. This ability makes discovery highly important to not only the individual, but wider society on a whole. As you can see, you're kind of qualifying why discovery is an important process in either the protagonist's life or even the reader's life as they explore the text. If the question was reveal both the emotional and intellectual responses, as it was in 2016, you might want to say the process of discovery evokes an amalgam of both intellectual and emotional responses. These responses constitute discovery's enduring value across contexts. Or if it was this question, which is discoveries can affirm or challenge society's assumptions and beliefs about aspects of the human experience in the world, you might say the process of discovery has the ability to affirm and challenge the beliefs of broader society. In exposing the deficits and triumphs of these values, discovery allows us to better understand the human experience and the world. So I found when I used the process of discovery as, my thesis or as my focus of my essay, it was highly adaptable, and it also forced me to make evaluative statements about the concept of discovery as represented in my text, so both my OIT and my prescribed. I found this was really helpful for, almost forcing myself to write a high-range response. Accordingly, your essay plan should look something like this if you're using the process of discovery as the basis of your essay. So your first paragraph would be what catalyzes discovery, what triggers discovery in the beginning of your text. Second paragraph would be during the discovery, and then the third paragraph would be about what is learnt from discovery. So, for example, if it was uncovering what is hidden and reconsidering what is known, your first paragraph might be something like how uncovering what was previously unknown triggers the process of discovery, followed by a paragraph on how we may be challenged to reconsider our values during the process of discovery. And the third paragraph might be on both reconsideration and uncovering brings us to new understandings of ourselves and others. So keeping in mind that I always wrote in integrated paragraphs, as in I wrote about both texts, both my prescribed and my OIT, in every paragraph that I wrote. And so it allowed me to have 3 paragraphs that could go in depth into particular sections of discovery without having to write separate paragraphs for both of my texts. I thought this was the most efficient way. I thought it was also really sophisticated because you had to compare your text on a conceptual basis. So I would definitely recommend writing in an integrated fashion. However, if you haven't written in this way before, you shouldn't feel pressured to do so, and indeed you could still adopt this type of style, this process style of a discovery essay, even without integrated paragraphs. So perhaps you would do smaller paragraphs with only 2 quotes in them instead of 3 from each text to get through the whole process of discovery. So for the analysis for discovery, every quote should build upon the discovery concept that you've introduced in your first sentence of your paragraph. So if we go back to before, literally the sentence that I've written there would probably be my first sentence in my paragraph. So uncovering what is previously unknown triggers the process of discovery. Full stop. As simple as that. So then in your analysis, you want to think of your paragraph as kind of like a crescendo, right? You're building to a very complex idea that you present at the end of your paragraph. So accordingly, every quote should build upon the idea. So you start from the very simple idea that you introduce in the first sentence of your paragraph and then build up to the most complex statement at the end. You should not be explaining the plot of your text. So it's very easy, I think, if you're writing about the process of discovery, just to kind of recount or narrate what happened in your text. Be really careful not to do this. You can kind of assume that your marker has read the text, in that you should be giving them, detail of the plot, unless it's absolutely essential for the analysis that you're making. This is because your essay is supposed to be an argument. You're supposed to be writing persuasively and writing about plot without actually arguing how that's representing the concept of discovery isn't going to be persuasive for your marker. You should also build upon your quotes in order to establish personal voice. So that's really similar to what I was explaining before, right? Think of your paragraph as a crescendo. You start with your most simple sentence at the beginning of your paragraph, then a simple quote, build upon that quote with your next one, and come to an ultimate conclusion with the final quote that you have in that paragraph. So this also means that you need to link between the quotes that you're using. So it shouldn't be like this quote presents a completely different idea to the one that you're going to present next. Rather, they should be contingent upon each other, as the example I've given here. Okay, let's move on to Module A. Here, the focus of your thesis should be the impact of context on a text. Now, this could manifest in various different ways. Your thesis might look something like, values remain important over time, yet are reinterpreted according to the context of composers. It could be, the importance of a text is founded in its ability to speak to both audiences of its own and contemporary times. Or, through a comparative study, we may glean how universal values are distorted by respective composers. I guess the most important thing to take away from this is that your thesis, in both your modules, and even discovery to an extent, should be able to apply to a variety of texts, not just the ones that you've studied. So like, I could go and take one of these theses and apply it to both Richard III and Looking for Richard, and Metropolis and 1984, which are two completely different, sets of texts, but the thesis still remains true when applied to them. So this just goes to the conceptual nature of your thesis and what you should be aiming for. So make sure, your first sentences of your theses or your first sentences of your essay should look something like this. Of course, these are all structured around the comparative focus of the module. So for an essay plan, I would always write my paragraphs in themes, and these themes are contextual values that are important to both texts. So I'm talking about themes like authority, power, education, those types of things, big universals that you can talk about with any text, once again. I would discuss both texts in the same paragraph. So it would go text 1, text 2, text 2, text 1, like a sandwich, and then obviously flipped for the next paragraph, so text 2 first, text 1 in the middle, and then text 2 at the end again. Now, a lot of people freak out in Module A when looking at past papers and see that they have really specific questions sometimes. So what I would do in times like these is that I would have my first body paragraph specifically about the theme that they have given in the question, and then for the rest of my body paragraphs, so the other two, I would talk about what I had prepared, but integrate the theme underlying it. So, for example, if the question had asked about the importance of authority, but I had prepared a paragraph on gender, I would link these two themes and then write about that. So, for example, I would talk about how patriarchal structures strip authority from actors. I would talk about how authority is given, or feminist voice rather, is given authority within a text, or rather how context determines authority in my texts, and how does this differ between my two texts. So as you can see, you can keep the theme that you had prepared, but you must integrate what the structure has what the question rather has given you, in order to make sure you're hitting, the 17 to 20 out of 20 range. For Module A's analysis, you should contrast the context of both of your texts in order to explain the divergence between them. So, my text A represents this theme in this certain way because of this context, whereas in text B, the context is different, and therefore the theme is represented in a different way. You should also make sure to give attention to your core characters and how they differ between your texts. So, for example, in the text I studied, Looking for Richard and Richard III, of course, you have a look at the protagonist, Richard, and how he's shown in different lights according to the contexts of both composers. You should also know that critical readings are not expected in Module A. Another thing that I've included is the pencils, because I thought this was a really good way to understand context if you're not kind of getting it. So I used to think of themes as stencils, right? And so, for example, the theme of power as a stencil. It's the context of a text that then colours that theme in, that picks the certain colours, that picks the certain ways that that theme is represented. So remember that, a theme in itself, or an idea in a text, is always going to be determined by the context that surrounds the composer and what they want to represent to their audience. Or in other words, what colours they want to pick to colour their stencil in with. So for Module B, your thesis focus should be around textual integrity. If you haven't heard this term before, it's nicely defined on the NISA website, and it is the unity of a text, its use of form and language to produce an integrated whole in terms of meaning and value. Now this is specifically what NISA says that your Module B essay should focus on. Therefore, you should attempt to justify the value of the text that you've been given to study. And it's really simple to do so. All you have to do is use the question that you're given on the day. So for example, last year's question that I was asked was, how does Yeats use contrast to explore personal and political concerns in his poetry? So my thesis would have looked something like this. The lasting value of Yeats's poetry is found within his ability to intertwine contrasting concerns within one coherent text. Indeed, the poet's ingenious ability to harness language, form, and content enables audiences across contexts to better understand the dichotomous personal and political spheres. So here I've used exactly what's in the question plus the definition of textual integrity to justify why Yeats's poetry was important at the time that it was written and still important now, which is, the lasting value of textual integrity. However, this can be a bit daunting. You need to know your text really well enough to be able to adapt to the question on the day, because it is common for Module B questions to be quite specific. But that's the nature of the beast I found. I definitely spent more time preparing for Module B than any of my other modules, just because this was the type of question that you could be asked, and this was the type of thesis that was most likely to do well in the exam room. So for your essay plan, I would just do themed paragraphs like Module A. I actually found one theme in particular, which was the role of language, to be common amongst all of my texts, and it usually constituted my last paragraph. So if you think that language in and of itself is really important to your text, this might be something that you want to talk about in your essays. So when you do textual analysis in each paragraph, it should stretch across the text rather than being restricted to one scene. So I find that a scene-by-scene analysis can actually be quite limiting for an essay, in the same way that just, doing one poem at a time can be very limiting. I would instead do 2 poems in the one paragraph, or do multiple scenes on the one paragraph, so that you can actually explore the theme in its entirety rather than focusing on one specific scene. In analysis, you want to make sure that you have quotes that use form and language techniques, because that's the specific requirements of the module. You also want to link back to the focus of the question, even if it is very specific, in every single paragraph, if not most instances of analysis. I would also advise you to be very evaluative, so use words like ingeniously, insightfully, cleverly, because remember, you're trying to make a judgment of why this text continues to be important across time. Moreover, there's a lot of anxiety about using critics in Module B, and I would say that you should only use critics that you understand. At first, you should only use them if you understand them, and you should use them if they either critique, so poke holes in your argument, or expand what you're trying to say. So my number one rule with critics was, if I can say that quote in my own words and achieve exactly the same meaning, then there's no point in quoting the critic. And of course, you're not going to be pulled up for plagiarism in your HSC. Obviously, don't rip off the idea directly, but if you've thought of that idea before and it's made clear perhaps through the academic reading, then I don't think you necessarily have to quote them. Use your own words to describe the idea that academic is trying to say, or of course, apply it to quotes that you think are important within your own text. However, if you think that the critic has nailed it, there's no better way that you could express that idea, that's when you quote the critic. I think this is the most effective way to differentiate between when and when not to use critics. I also want to, stamp out the myth that you have to use a critic to get into an A range response. That's absolutely not true. Indeed, if you use a critic superficially or in a wrong way that's just kind of like tacked onto the end of your paragraph, it's going to take marks away from you rather than add them. So the last thing that we're going to go through is study tips. And my main piece of advice, and I think the only proper way to study for English right now in this period of your HSC, is to write practice essays. By this time in the HSC, well, after graduation at least, when I was spending each day at home, I was trying to write at least 3 past papers a day, and usually one of those would be English. I would always say to try and do past papers in full, because you've got to get used to sitting there for 2 hours and pumping out essays. I think the first time I sat a 2-hour exam, I was absolutely exhausted just because I hadn't thought that hard for that long before. I really do encourage you to sit down and make yourself do full papers. Also for the reason of timing, you need to make sure that you know which parts of the paper you need more time for. So only through doing 2-hour papers was I aware that I could get my short answers and my creative done within 25-30 minutes each, leaving me a whole hour for the essay. If I had done the sections separately, I might not have known that I could skip around with time like this. So yes, for that reason, I would definitely say try and do past papers in full. I would also try and set yourself a daily goal with past papers and write it on a little whiteboard or a post-it note or something and stick it above your desk. So my goal was always to do 3 past papers a day. And once I had done those 3 past papers, I was satisfied that I was studying enough for the upcoming HSC. Having that feeling of satisfaction, even like at a daily level, is really important to keeping your motivation levels up during this time of high stress. I would also advise you not to neglect discovery. I know that you've been doing it for about a year now and it seems very, very boring. I trust me, I empathize with you. But, it's easy to forget to look at it when you've got all these other modules to study for. I think that, as I've said in previous videos, the short answers is really important and really easy to get full marks in. So you should make sure that you absolutely ace these parts or these discovery section in your study to make sure you're getting the most marks possible in your end of year exam. I would also advise you to regularly hand in your essays to teachers. Remember, you don't have to hand them in to your advanced teacher alone. You can hand them into other teachers in your school or upload them onto ATAR notes to get them marked. This is because you still need feedback to see where you're doing things wrong. You don't want to be repeating the same mistakes the entire time that you're sitting the HSC. So remember to keep handing in your essays regularly and improving upon feedback. I would also say to sit with open books. So there's no point in putting away your quotes if you still need to learn them. I rarely sat down and learned my quotes by writing lists and lists of them. The way that I learnt my quotes was by integrating them into the essays that I was writing. I would also say don't be afraid to change things up if they're not working. If you've studied for one way the entire year and you're still not remembering certain quotes or paragraphs that you want to write about, change how you're studying. Perhaps move to recording yourself saying your essays aloud and then listening to them back. Perhaps you need to do more visual things, so change your notes into mind maps or color coordinated palm cards, which is something that I thought was really helpful and helped me to remember my quotes. Right now you've got to be truthful with yourself, and if how you were studying before is not working at all, try and change up your schedule, try and change up the materials that you use to study, find something that works for these final exams. Okay, that's all for the essays that we have. I hope that it was helpful and I wish you the very, very best in your final HSC exams. You're almost there. Keep studying. You'll be on holidays before you know it. Remember to leave any questions that you might have on the ATAR Notes forums. Alright, thanks for watching, guys.